Johnny Carson had never experienced such a long silence in his 40-year career in the studio. 1974, Burbank Studio. Cameras rolling, 20 million Americans watching. Muhammad Ali had just said something that made Carson's hand freeze on his coffee cup. A few people in the audience had stood up, whether to applaud or protest, it wasn't clear. In the control room, producer Fred de Cordova ran his finger across his throat. "Do we cut?" But Carson didn't cut. Instead, he leaned forward and asked Ali a question that would make America's most controversial man unable to hold back his tears on screen for the first time. And no one knew that this moment would change television history, transforming an enemy into a hero. To truly grasp this moment, we need to go back 6 years, to the chaotic spring of 1968. America was literally burning that year. When Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis on April 4th, riots erupted in over 100 cities. The streets smelled of smoke and rage. Robert Kennedy would share the same fate 2 months later. Body bags arrived from Vietnam every day. The country was experiencing one of the deepest divisions in its history. And right in the middle of this chaos, there was one man that America saw as the symbol of everything: Cassius Clay, now Muhammad Ali. Ali was only 22 years old when he defeated Sonny Liston to become world champion in 1964. When he shouted, "I am the greatest," America laughed. He was a young, handsome, charismatic boxer. But when he announced the next day that he had joined the Nation of Islam and changed his name, America's smile froze. In 1967, everything got worse. Ali refused to go to the Vietnam War. "No Viet Cong ever called me nigger," he said. This sentence was courage for some, treason for most. His boxing license was revoked. His passport was confiscated. His world heavyweight championship was stripped away. During the most productive years of his career, between ages 25-28, he was banned from the ring. The media labeled him coward, traitor, enemy of America. Sports writers refused to even write his name, continuing to call him Cassius Clay. Television channels ignored him. It was at this exact point that an unexpected name entered the stage: Johnny Carson. Carson had been hosting The Tonight Show since 1962, and the NBC studio where he hosted the program entered the living rooms of 20 million Americans every night. But Carson wasn't just a comedian. Behind the camera, he was a sharp-witted, politically independent, and extremely cautious man. For 30 years, he almost never revealed his own political views. He avoided controversy. He swam in safe waters. That's why when he told his producer Fred de Cordova in the spring of 1968 to invite Muhammad Ali, everyone was shocked. "Johnny, this is madness," said de Cordova. "Sponsors will flee. Audiences will protest. NBC will come down on us." Carson replied with his characteristic composure, "Fred, this man is either truly dangerous or the most misunderstood person in America. Either way, 20 million people should see this." No one knew that behind Carson's decision lay a personal history. He had served as a sailor in World War II and had seen the true face of war. While decoding enemy codes on an aircraft carrier in Japanese waters, he had witnessed the deaths of his friends. This experience had changed him. Perhaps he had more respect for Ali's courage to refuse war than anyone realized, but he never shared this with the public. And on that tense night of 1968, America's most beloved host and most hated man would meet on the same stage. That first night, the NBC studio in Burbank was filled with a different energy than usual. It was mid-June 1968, and even the air seemed tense. Los Angeles's typical heat was straining the studio's air conditioning system, and audience members were fanning themselves with their programs. Carson was making his final preparations backstage when his producer approached him. "Security has been doubled," de Cordova said quietly. "There are protesters outside, both supporters and opponents of Ali." Carson nodded, but there was no sign of worry on his face. Or at least he wasn't showing it. When Ali arrived at the studio, he was every bit the showman. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit. His tie pin seemed to catch the sunlight. He had only one assistant with him. Unusual for Ali, who was famous for his large entourage. He shook hands with studio workers one by one, asked their names, told the woman serving coffee, "You smell wonderful, ma'am." Their first encounter backstage was brief but meaningful. Carson extended his hand. "Welcome to my show, Mr. Ali." Ali's eyes opened with momentary surprise. He had said Ali, not Clay. This small gesture was a harbinger of what would happen that night. At 11:30 p.m., the lights came on and the Tonight Show music filled the studio. Carson began with his usual monologue, made a few political jokes, but never mentioned Ali. The audience responded with nervous laughter. Everyone was waiting for the main guest. And then, the moment came. "My next guest," said Carson, "has one of the most recognized faces in the world and is one of the most controversial athletes. Please welcome Muhammad Ali." A murmur erupted in the studio. There was applause, but also boos. Several people stood up, some to cheer, some just to get a better view. Ali walked onto the stage with that legendary stride, shoulders back, chin up, his smile both defiant and warm. Carson didn't stand up. That was protocol. He only stood for very special guests. But when he extended his hand to Ali, their handshake lasted 1 second longer than normal. The cameras captured this moment in close-up. The first few minutes passed in safe waters. Carson asked about boxing. Ali answered. Ali recited a poem, "Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee," and the audience laughed. The tension seemed to dissolve, but Carson was determined to take risks that night. "A lot of people are watching you right now," said Carson, his voice dropping slightly, "and many of them are angry at you because of the Vietnam issue. What do you say to them?" The studio instantly turned to ice. In the control room, a technician muttered, "Here we go." Ali paused for a moment. His smile disappeared, but his composure remained intact. "Johnny," he said without raising his voice, "I didn't refuse war. I refused to kill. There's a difference." Then he added, "My religion forbids me from going to another country and killing people who have never done me any harm. No Viet Cong ever called me nigger, never chained me to their dog. My real war is here on this soil." A few people in the audience applauded, others shifted uncomfortably. Carson looked at his notepad, then into Ali's eyes. "Aren't you afraid? You could go to prison. You could lose everything." Ali's response would be etched into the memory of everyone in the studio that night. "Johnny, I was already born in prison. To be born a black man in America is to be born behind invisible bars. My freedom is inside." Silence. A full 5 seconds, an eternity on television. Carson's hand reached for his cup, but didn't take it. The studio audience looked at each other. This was not what they expected from a boxing champion. That night, Ali was on the program for a full 45 minutes, 3 times the normal guest time. And in those 45 minutes, the man America saw as a dangerous militant appeared on screen for the first time as a 3-dimensional human being. Not arrogant, but thoughtful. Not angry, but principled. Not frightening, but fearless. After the program, NBC's switchboard lines were jammed. Hundreds of calls, half complaints, half thanks. But Carson made no comment. The next day, he continued his program as if nothing had happened. But this was only the beginning. Over the next 6 years, Ali would come to The Tonight Show many times. Each time, a slightly different Ali would emerge. In 1970, he came while awaiting his Supreme Court case. This time, he looked more tired, more thoughtful. Carson asked him about his family. Ali talked about his wife, his children. "I worry about them," he said. Vulnerability in his voice for the first time. "I don't want their father to be remembered as a traitor. I want their father to be remembered as principled." In 1971, he came after his first loss to Joe Frazier. He was defeated, but not crushed. "Losing teaches, Johnny," he said. "Winning only makes you think you're right. Losing reminds you why you're fighting." In 1973, he came 3 months after his jaw was broken against Ken Norton. His jaw was still wired shut. Speaking was difficult, but he still came. Carson asked, "Why did you come to the show in such a hurry?" Ali replied through the wires, with difficulty, but determination. "Because if I stay silent, they'll think they managed to silence me." And then came 1974. A few months before the George Foreman fight, that historic night, that night everything was different. When Ali walked onto the stage, he looked calmer than ever. This wasn't showman Ali Des. This was a different Ali, deeper, more introspective. Carson noticed it immediately. "You look different tonight," he said. "Is everything okay?" Ali paused for a moment. Then he did something that made everyone in the studio freeze. He turned to the camera and looked directly into the lens. "America, I need to talk to you," he said. "As the real Muhammad Ali, no mask, no show, just me." And for the next 11 minutes, 20 million Americans held their breath. The studio lights danced on Ali's face. The clock showed exactly 11:47 p.m. NBC Studio One in Burbank had witnessed countless legendary moments up to that point. Frank Sinatra's surprise duet, Orson Welles' magic show, Dean Martin's drunk acts. But that night, on that October night of 1974, the studio would witness something completely different. Ali took a deep breath before answering Carson's question. His chest rose and fell. His hands, those hands that had once won world championships, lay motionless on his knees. Hands that normally were constantly moving, gesturing, pointing fingers, now still as stone. "Johnny," he finally said, his voice an octave lower than normal, "I've been wearing a mask for 7 years, the greatest mask. The mask of the man who roars, boasts, recites poems." Someone's cough was heard in the studio, then silence again. "Tonight, I want to take off that mask." Carson's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing. 30 years of television experience had taught him this. Sometimes the best question is no question at all. Ali continued. "When I refused to join the army in 1967, everyone said coward, said traitor, said enemy of America." With each word his voice grew quieter. But no one asked why. Cameraman Red Corcoran would describe that night years later. "I worked behind the camera for 30 years, but I can never forget Ali's look at that moment. It was as if all the storms inside him had suddenly calmed, leaving only pure pain." "Johnny, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky," said Ali. "When I was 6 years old, my father took me to town. I was thirsty. I went to a fountain. It said whites only. My father pulled me away, said, 'You can't drink from here.'" His voice trembled, but he continued. "When I was 12, my bicycle was stolen. I went to the police. The cop laughed. 'Black kid's bike got stolen.' 'Get in line,' he said." A woman in the studio sniffled. Carson's hand was clenched under the table. Only the cameraman doing the extreme close-up could notice this. "When I was 14, they killed Emmett Till. Do you know Emmett Till, Johnny?" Ali's eyes glistened, but the tears didn't fall. He was holding them back, as if letting them fall would be a defeat. A 14-year-old boy, because he whistled at a white woman. They pulled his body from the river. His face was unrecognizable, and his killers were acquitted. Silence. In the control room, Fred de Cordova was watching the monitor, his hand hovering over the cut button, but unable to press it. He couldn't. Ali leaned forward, as if he was about to share a secret with 20 million people. "Now do you know what this country wants from me, Johnny? It wants me to go to Vietnam and kill people who have never called me a nigger. The people who refuse to drink from the same fountain as me now want me to die for them." Carson's lips parted. He seemed about to say something, But Ali continued, "Let me tell you something else. I am not a coward. I fought Sonny Liston. Everyone was afraid of him. I fought Joe Frazier. 15 rounds in the middle of hell. I'm going to fight George Foreman." The man bends iron with his fist. He stood up. Everyone in the studio flinched. Ali spread his arms wide. "Look at me. This body doesn't know what fear is. This heart doesn't know what fear is. But this mind," he pointed to his temple, "this mind recognizes injustice, and it refuses to say yes sir to injustice." Then he slowly sat down. It was as if all his energy had drained for that brief moment. His hands were trembling now. This time everyone could see. "They took 5 years from me, Johnny," he said, his voice almost reduced to a whisper. "The best years of my career. Time I could have spent with my children. Money I could have earned. And they still call me coward." Carson hadn't said a single word until that moment. The pen in his hand lay motionless on his notepad. His eyes were locked on the man before him. And then Ali said something that made everyone in the studio freeze, including Carson. "But that's not what hurts the most, Johnny." Ali's voice cracked. For the first time, it truly cracked. "What hurts the most is the fear in my mother's eyes. Every day when I leave the house, she wonders, will my son come back? My father staying silent against the insults from neighbors. My children being humiliated at school, told your father is a traitor." A single tear rolled down. Just one drop. Ali quickly wiped it away, but the camera had already captured it. "I love this country, Johnny. I really do, but this country doesn't love me. At least, not yet." Silence descended. A full 11 seconds, an eternity on television. The 300 people in the studio seemed to have stopped breathing. Only the hum of the air conditioning could be heard. And then Johnny Carson did something he had never done before in the history of the program. He stood up, slowly, as if declaring sacred ground. He came out from behind his desk. He walked to the chair where Ali was sitting, and extended his hand. Ali looked. There were tears in Carson's eyes. Everyone who saw this was shocked. Johnny Carson, America's most composed man, was crying. "Thank you," said Carson, his voice hoarse. America needed to hear this. Applause began. First a few people, then more, then the entire studio. A standing ovation. Some were crying. Some were still in shock. But they were applauding. That night, 20 million Americans witnessed something on screen. The moment when an enemy became human. The moment when a threat was actually pain. The moment when a traitor was actually a patriot. Just with a different understanding of patriotism. And Carson said only one thing to his producer the next morning. "That was the most important interview I've ever done in my life." But behind that night, there was another story no one knew. Johnny Carson had joined the United States Navy in 1943. When he was only 17 years old, he served as a communications officer on an aircraft carrier. In Japanese waters, during the most intense periods of the war, he witnessed the deaths of his friends while trying to decode enemy codes. Carson almost never talked about this experience. He had refused to write an autobiography, brushed it off in interviews, didn't give details even to close friends. But his inner circle knew one thing. Carson had seen war and understood that war was not something to be romanticized. In 1968, when he made the decision to invite Ali to the program, his producer Fred de Cordova had asked him, "Why are you insisting so much, Johnny? We could lose sponsors. NBC could come down on us." Carson had looked out the window that day and remained silent for a long time. Then he turned and said these words. De Cordova would share this in an interview years later. "Fred, I fought, and I know what war is. I know what those kids are going through in Vietnam. And when a man stands up and says, 'I don't want to kill,' I want to listen to him. Because maybe the bravest man is the one who refuses to pull the trigger." This confession was never shared with the public. Carson kept his political views private until his death. His comments about Ali were always professional, never personal, but his close friends had noticed something. After every one of Ali's appearances on the program, Carson would do something he did for no other guest. He would personally thank him. Backstage, away from the cameras, the two men would talk alone for a few minutes. No one knew what was said in these conversations, but in 1988, at Ali's last Tonight Show appearance, Carson said something. At the end of the program, turning to the cameras, "This man," he said, pointing to Ali, "taught me that war isn't fought only with weapons. Sometimes the greatest war is having the courage to say no." The applause in the studio lasted 5 minutes. Ali, at that point, was struggling to speak due to the effects of Parkinson's disease. His hands trembled. His facial muscles could no longer be controlled as they once were. But he smiled. And leaning toward Carson, he whispered something in his ear. Carson's eyes filled with tears. His lips formed the words "thank you," but no sound came out. What was in that whisper? When Carson died in 2005, he took this secret to his grave. When Ali died in 2016, he took it too. But in 2019, a piece of paper was found among de Cordova's personal notes. It was written in Carson's handwriting. "Ali told me tonight, 'Johnny, you gave me a stage, and I give you a promise. I will never waste this stage.' And he didn't. He never did." After that 1974 night, everything changed. Not all at once, but slowly, like water drops wearing away stone. The next day, newspapers were divided. Some ran headlines saying Ali provokes again, but some for the first time, asked a different question: what if he's right? The letters coming to NBC were surprising. Yes, there were complaints. But for the first time, letters of support outnumbered complaints. A farmer from Texas had written, "I'm a Vietnam veteran. I used to hate Ali, but last night I listened to him, and maybe I misunderstood him." This was exactly what Carson wanted. Not to create enemies, but to build bridges. Not to shout, but to make people listen. And Ali, on the stage, Carson gave him that night, had succeeded in doing just that. In October 1974, just weeks after that program, Ali pulled off one of history's greatest surprises in the ring. In Zaire, in the Rumble in the Jungle match, he knocked out George Foreman, whom no one believed he could beat. He reclaimed the World Championship. And America, for the first time, cheered for a traitor. That final Tonight Show meeting in 1988 was the closing of an era. Carson was preparing for retirement. Ali was battling Parkinson's. Neither was young anymore. Both were tired, but both were still standing. That night, Carson turned to the audience at the end of the program and said, 20 years ago, when this man came to my studio, people warned me, 'It will end your career,' they said. But I saw something that night. Not a threat, but a teacher. And I wasn't wrong." Ali held the microphone with trembling hands. His speech was slow now. His words sometimes blurred, but what he said was crystal clear. "Johnny, you opened your door to me. America was watching you, and you let me in. That courage, I will never forget it." Not a single person in the studio remained without shedding tears. When Johnny Carson died in 2005, Ali released a message. Due to Parkinson's, he could no longer write. Speaking was difficult. But he said one sentence: "Johnny Carson was the man who carried my voice to America. I will love him forever." When Muhammad Ali died in 2016, millions from around the world attended his funeral. The man who was once declared a traitor was now remembered as the world's most beloved person. Presidents, kings, ordinary people, everyone mourned, and many said the same thing. The moment I first truly understood Ali was when I watched him on Johnny Carson's show. This story reminds us, sometimes what makes a person a hero or an enemy is not what they do, but the stage they're given. Carson gave Ali a stage. Ali turned that stage into history. And both of them never forgot each other. The greatest victory, Ali once said, Is the victory won without defeating anyone? Just to be understood. Sometimes, that's enough.